Hello, students. Welcome to Chapter 14 in General Psychology. This is on stress to begin with, and then on positive psychology. So let's start off with stress. What is stress? How do we define it? What is our body doing during stress? So, stress is the process or how we describe when an individual perceives something and responds to events that we appraise as being overwhelming or threatening to our well-being. So with that, doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be threatening to our well-being. We're just appraising it or perceiving it as. So a key part of this definition is that perception. Something might be perceived by one person as threatening, but not to another. So someone who really loves snakes, has a lot of snakes, knows a lot about snakes, comes across a snake on a trail, might not be stressed at all because they don't perceive it to be a threat, but someone else who's maybe afraid of snakes might be threatened by that snake. So as an example. So with this, our stressors are those things in the environment that lead us to feel that stress. Any kind of stimuli that initiate that stress process. So our primary appraisal is this a challenge? Is this a threat? For the example of the snake previously, if you know that it's not a poisonous or dangerous snake, you would say, nope, this isn't a challenge, this isn't a threat. I am not stressed out. With that being said, though, we can look at this threat and say, hey, is this a threat or is this a challenge? That's that primary appraisal. And we can say, oh, this is a challenge. This is something I can grow from. So that might be something like a paper in a class. That might be a challenge that you can grow from. It's not trying to say harm you or give you negative consequences versus maybe a poisonous snake would lead to harm or give you negative consequences. And so that leads to the secondary appraisal of what can I do? What can I do about this? How effective are my options going to be? Um, So do I have to do, if I have no effective options to deal with this, then I might see it as a very high threat versus if I have some options to deal with this, problem focused coping or even emotion focused coping, that might be a lower threat to us. So stressors can be just about anything. So obviously traumas, oftentimes life changes are stresses, but our daily hassles lead to more stress than we tend to realize as well. Job strain, job burnout as well can lead to stress. Triggers for people are stressful, right? Sensory inputs can be stressful. Lots of things could be stressful. So if you're in my in-class, depending on the kind of class, I might have this as an activity, but I will navigate to this right now and give you an idea of this stress inventory. So here is a stress inventory. And as you can see, some things up here are very high stress point values. And the idea for this scale is to add them up for yourself and see what score you get. So I'll slowly scroll down. So the ones down here are perceived or evaluated as less stressful overall, but they do add up. Some of these might even be daily things if you're making minor violations of the law daily. But with that, the idea here is that all of these stresses add up in our life. So if you do this kind of assessment and get a score of 300 points or more, you are at a very high chance of a health breakdown in the next 2 years. This means either a mental health breakdown, this means, and one thing that we'll discuss in the next few slides is how stress is related to the hormones in our body. And that with this stress piling up and having a high score, your body is less able to take care of infections. It's less able to take care of itself. It's less able to fight off bacteria. And so over the course of the next 2 years, if that stress level stays that high, you are at high likelihood of other health breakdowns in your body, something you might have to be hospitalized for. Versus if you're just over 150 points, you're only at about a 50% chance of a health breakdown in the next 2 years. And if you're under 150, you're at a much lower chance. So lucky you. That being said, there are things that we'll discuss in this chapter on stress to decrease our stress as well. But a main point here is that stress is very harmful for your body. Stress is very harmful for your brain. Stress is very harmful for your cognition, your sleep, your digestion, your body healing itself. Stress kills people, honestly, is one of the things. It's a primary contributor to early death in humans. So, with this, think about, is there any sort of good stress? I'm talking about all the harms, but there are types of good stress. So, eustress is what we define as good stress. These are things that can motivate us. So, you might be a little stressed about an assignment, but it might motivate you to do better. It might motivate you to get it done. You might be a little stressed about a dance recital coming up, or a music performance, or your performance on a date, or something like that. And so you might have more attention, more focus towards those things, and have better performance in it. So distress is when it goes past that line where we have now too much stress and we are now fatigued, exhausted, we have health breakdown and burnout. We cannot perform well anymore. So some things that our bodies do in response to stress are pupil dilation, especially for like fight and flight. So if we go back to that snake example, fight or flight, our heart rate increases, our perspiration begins, our respiration quickens, and our muscles tense and might even tremble. And some of these things also happen when we have more cortisol in our bodies from long-term or chronic stresses. So as stresses are building up, we see people with more and more stress have higher blood pressure, are breathing shallower and shorter, taking in less oxygen with their breaths. So it is impacting multiple systems in the body. So we see that oftentimes, especially if it's something like a fight or flight response, we'll have an initial setup of our body getting an initial jolt, starting to charge up, sending messages to the brain and hormones in the body to start putting out cortisol and adrenaline. We're at a higher state as we are trying to deal with whatever stress is in front of us, whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or a snake. And then we are coming down off of that high of the stress, and we oftentimes are more exhausted. And this can happen over and over and over again. Imagine yourself going through, say, a haunted house. Your body can wear out overall, so this might not be as steep for any given stressor, but if it keeps going, you're going to have less and less and less kind of jumps, and your body can get exhausted, exhaust itself from this process. So our sympathetic nervous system releases adrenaline from the adrenal glands that activates a fight or flight response. The hypothalamus is also releasing different hormones that cause the pituitary gland to release more hormones that releases then cortisol. And with that, all of these hormones are flooding your system. So cortisol, adrenaline, all of these hormones are stress hormones that are flooding your system. And this prepares you to fight, to run away. And with this, it also makes a lot of body processes slow down or even stop entirely so you can face whatever threat and use the energy your body has for this threat. Which, when you are facing a saber-toothed tiger and you're able to fight it off or run away and then calm down afterwards, is a really fantastic system. It helps us survive, it helps us evolve over time. But now, if you have a big stress hanging over you, like tests coming up, loans that are due, that are just hanging over you, these are things that are going to be causing you the same kind of body processes and wear down some of those body systems. Some of these hormones are telling other body systems to work slower all the time. And that is some of the reasons that we see some of these health breakdowns or some of the compounding factors to them. So the effects of chronic stress is that it weakens your immune system. It's also associated with depression. So stress contributes to the development of many psychological disorders. If you have a psychological disorder, stress makes it worse. Stress can help to trigger psychological disorders as well. PTSD, obviously, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, but also major depressive disorder. Stress can lead to heart disease, musculoskeletal problems. Again, it's telling body systems to work in a different way than they're kind of evolved to just naturally without that stress. Your nervous system is working differently. There's different hormones, different neurotransmitters at different levels when you have high stress, and endocrine system and metabolic disorders, and also, like I said, death. So when we look at people that live the longest in the world, the place with the most people above the age of 100, and this is, I believe we talked about this in an earlier chapter, depending on when you're watching this one. So one place that we see a lot of people over 100 is Okinawa, Japan. And when we compare these people from Okinawa to other people around them in Japan and to people worldwide, one of the main factors that we see that they have is less stress. Their diet is similar to other people in Japan around them, which do have higher age ranges or a longer lifespan than people across the rest of the world. So there is definitely going to be some genetic components, some dietary components, some cultural components, and a big part of it is also they're very socially interactive. They're doing a lot of things daily, walking and hanging out with other friends and things like that. But another big factor, one of the biggest factors that we see comparing them to other people that are maybe similar to them in other ways, is lower stress. So since they have lower stress, we see that their bodies are functioning better, more optimally, and they have lived a lot longer because of that. So anything that we can do to decrease our stress across the lifespan will essentially add to our life. So a couple other psychophysiological disorders that are relevant to stress, cardiovascular disorders like hypertension, heart disease, also irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, allergies, lower back pain, headaches, acne, eczema, and psoriasis. All of these can be made worse with stress. And stress can trigger them. Stress does a lot of things all throughout our body. Because remember, hormones are communicating with many, many symptoms. And when those hormone levels are different, that communication is a little different. With this, one big thing is that these stress hormones like adrenaline, like cortisol, actually slow down the production of lymphocytes, which are specific white blood cells that trigger immune responses in our body. So people who have high stress levels are a lot more likely to get sick when exposed to like the common cold. They're more likely to have poorer response following illness or fighting off illness. We see that in studies of vaccines, people with chronic stress show poorer antibody response to vaccines. So while someone might have a sore arm, they might actually get sick after getting the vaccine, not necessarily from the vaccine itself, but sometimes from other additional stressors, because it is a stress on your body to fight the vaccine. Some are completely inert, but your body's still marshaling an immune response, and that's putting more stress on your body. We also see that stress slows down wound healing. So while you might have got a little cut and had not been stressed, it would have healed up just fine. But because the impaired immune response, because your body is focusing its energy on other things, if you have high stress, that wound's going to be much, much slower to heal. And so these things compound over time, leading to things like health breakdowns. Also, we see a lot of high blood pressure from stress. Stress in and of itself increases blood pressure. This makes it a lot more likely to have things like strokes as well. So we also see these hormones, these stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, tend to make people feel more angry or agitated as well. But they're also related to other negative activity or other negative kind of feelings that we have: contempt, disgust, fear. These can all lead to negative downward spirals. So feeling stressed might make you feel worse, get more angry more easily, feel more contempt or nervous or fearful, and that can lead you to make decisions that are also negative towards you. You can make a lot of negative downward spirals because of stress. Your body's doing negative things as well, which can be very harmful to you in the long run. So we see that patients with heart disease have more depression than people in the general population. So heart disease can make depression more likely, but also people with depression tend to get more heart disease than people who don't have depression. So it's a bidirectional interaction then. Again, it's a negative downward spiral. Stress can make these things much more likely. They can make headaches happen. It also, if you have more stress, people tend to be more sensitive to pain. Your body is responding to things differently because your stress hormones and the neurotransmitters in your brain are trying to respond to a threat. So with asthma, stress can cause or induce asthma attacks, make it harder or slower to get out of asthma attacks as well. And here we see some graphs of a couple different variables. Hopefully my face isn't covering this one on the top right. We've got sex, age, race, which is really ethnicity, education, employment, and income here in the US, and all broken down by rankings of stress. As you can see, people making the lowest income have the highest stress. You can see maybe a pattern of people with who are younger having higher stress. And you can see minorities in the US having higher stress as well. So again, all these things can compound. Having stress means you are more likely to have other severe health problems over time. So what do we do about stress? We've got a lot of bad news. Stress is slowly killing us all, or maybe if your score is well above 300, maybe more quickly killing you. So what can we do about it? What can we do to decrease stress or regulate stress? One of the best methods to regulate stress is problem-focused coping. And problem-focused coping is essentially exactly what it sounds like. Solving the problem, using strategies to work on the problem, or at least parts of the problem. You might not be able to solve the whole thing making you stressful, but if you can take out a piece of that, that might take the score of 60 for stress down to like 40 for that stress. So basically, you're addressing the problem, and this is effective when the stressor is perceived as controllable and is controllable as well. With this, you can identify problems, weigh solutions, cost and benefit, select your solution, and then address if it worked or not. So this kind of problem-focused coping could work really well in a setting like this. You might feel very stressed on a high ropes course, but you might solve the problem, tackle the challenge, get through it, and then see halfway through how you're doing, evaluate that, shift your strategy, and get across, and then your stress is lower because you have solved the problem. That being said, not all stresses are problems that can be solved. There are definitely stresses in life. Let's say a death of a family member. You cannot problem focus out of that. You can't make that person come back to life. That being said, there might be some relevant stresses around it, like the stress of planning a funeral, or um, who now is going to do these things around the household, something like that. Some of those problems can definitely be solved. So some pieces of that can be problem focused, but there are definitely stressors that cannot be solved with problem focused coping. So another big one is emotion focused coping. This is trying to reduce the negative emotions associated with stress. So this can include avoiding the stress, minimizing the stress, distancing yourself from the problem, or even seeking something positive to kind of override that negative. Also, positive comparison with others, gratitude activities, these things can help reduce stress, and they can be very helpful. That being said, depending on the level of the stress, avoiding, minimizing, or distancing may not be enough for the given stress. Again, it might be able to cut some of that off, but it might not be able to do everything that's needed. So some examples is maybe watching a movie or playing video games to distract yourself. Hanging out with friends is a really good example to help relax and have some positive emotions, distract yourself instead of ruminating on the stress. Another good thing about friends is they could, in some cases, form some problem-focused coping strategies as well for you. So another thing is perceived control. So if we have a belief that we can change things around ourselves, we tend to deal with stress better. So the higher your perceived control, the less stress tends to impact you. So if it also improves your mental and physical health, you are less reactive to daily stressors. So the higher your self-efficacy, the better you're going to be at controlling new stresses that come up. So with this is a very high predictor, the highest predictor. Thinking back, I think that is what the studies said, was that it's the highest predictor of surviving for late adults in nursing homes. So if we take, let's take one person in a nursing home. They are pretty healthy. They're able to do things on their own. They can make choices. They can go to do any of the activities. They don't have many limitations and many medical procedures day by day, but they don't feel like they have a lot of control. Like this is a big change from their previous life. They feel restricted. They don't feel in control of their life, even if they actually could make a lot of choices. Maybe their perceived control is low, but they're overall healthy. Let's compare them to a person who is in a wheelchair, is doing a lot of treatments every day, is not able to do all the activities in the nursing home. Maybe they're really limited mobility wise, and because of the kind of interventions they have to have, maybe they also have, say, an oxygen tank and they have to be taking vaccines every day or something like that. Well, they wouldn't be taking vaccines every day, but they have some shots every day. So they're very limited in the types of activities that they can choose, but they appreciate those choices and perceive that they have choices. And so their perceived control is actually higher. That because they have some choices that they have higher perceived control. The statistics show that the person who feels that even though they're healthier and they have low perceived control, they are more likely to be dead when the researchers follow up in 8 months or a year and a half than the person who is actually in worse health but has higher perceived control. It's a really dramatic thing related to stress. So if we have this kind of perceived control, we tend to handle these stresses and changes better. So another big coping strategy is social support. We kind of mentioned this earlier, but others can be beneficial. They can give guidance, they can give encouragement, they can help us accept stresses, they can be an emotional comfort there. Sometimes, depending on what the stress is, they might even be able to provide tangible problem-focused coping. So let's say you're having trouble with a bill and they offer to pay for it. Clear help, right? That should regulate your stress a lot better. But also just being there for other people is a really good way to decrease stress. And with this, we also see that social support boosts our immune system and lowers blood pressure, so does some of the opposite things that stress does. In some studies of like emergency health challenges, whether it was something like a big surgery or a big accident and then recovery or something like that, individuals with strong social relationships were 50% more likely to survive. In some of the studies I read, before a really big major surgery, one of the main predictor variables that doctors will take into account of what kind of surgery are we going to do, how invasive, how intensive, was based on social support. Because oftentimes there will be people with no social support that will go into a surgery and not wake up after. So it's a very sad reality, but with it, having strong social relationships is very predictive of surviving through these kinds of things. When I had my motorcycle accident and dislocated my knee and had to get a couple surgeries to repair literally all the ligaments in my knee, replace them with donor ligaments. That was one of the main things that was discussed beforehand in trying to decide for the doctor what kind of process, because there were less invasive things that could be done and more invasive things that could be done. And in the end, because I did have some social support networks, they determined to do basically the most intensive, and I'm glad of that because now I can walk and run and jump and things. So that's very nice for me. I'm very happy that that happened. Took a long time. Without the social support, I don't know how I would have gotten through that year of physical therapy after the surgeries. It was tough. So without social support, I can see how people would definitely, without that kind of social support, could kind of just give up on the new challenges that face them. So with this, exercise is another really good one. So exercise in and of itself kind of puts your body in a stressed out state, right? Your heart is pumping, your blood is pumping, you're breathing sharper, and it's sending other chemicals too. So it is sending stress hormones and adrenaline, but it's also sending things like endorphins. And so it's not a complete like reset of your brain and hormones, but it kind of does that. It helps to regulate those hormones in your body, those hormones and neurotransmitters in your brain. Um, so it helps so that your brain and body are acting more appropriately if you're regularly exercising. We also see that people who are fit are more resistant to stress. Fit people recover quicker from stress. And so regular exercise, if nothing else in our lifespan chapter or other chapters have encouraged you to exercise, hopefully this does. It's a really good way to decrease stress in your life. And the minimum recommendation, even into late adulthood, is 30 minutes of exercise at least 4 days a week. And this is things that should get your blood pumping, your heart pumping, and your breathing a little bit more. So you're getting out of breath. So some aerobic exercise. So figure out something that works for you, kinds of exercises that you like. If you end up having mobility challenges, talk to doctors about what kind of exercises you can do. So that's the big thing, is finding exercises that you will do and you can do. Another big thing that helps for regulating stress is trying to relax, doing things that for you are relaxing. It helps reduce our sympathetic nervous system's arousal. It reduces blood pressure, things like resting, doing something relaxing that you enjoy, sitting on a beach, reading a book. Mindfulness meditation is another really great example as well. So doing these kinds of things can help relax our body, again, kind of fight against some of those stresses. And putting these together in a variety of ways can really help take some of those things that might be closer to a score of 300 down much closer to a score of, say, 200 on those stress scales. So here are a couple linked videos. Mindfulness is a really great example. Both of these are types of mindfulness interventions. This first one is a guided mindfulness experiment that I did with colleagues at Claremont Graduate University. We tested this. We actually had people do this versus a brewery tour to see which one would make them feel less stressed. So that brewery tour was about 7.5 minutes as well. Both of them have female voices speaking in them, so we tried to control a lot of variables that way. And I found that it does decrease stress for a short term. It doesn't really last past 15 minutes, but that's totally fine. Guided mindfulness is helpful for people who've never tried mindfulness before. Basically, a person guiding you through it is telling you what to do with your body, with your breathing. But mindfulness in general can be done with just your body wherever you are. Oftentimes the focus is to focus on something so that as thoughts come in, kind of like the sleeves on a stream, and maybe I'll pull it up but not include the audio right now. So as we see this part of this video, every once in a while you will see a leaf like fall in the water and continue on. The idea of mindfulness is that these leaves in the water are your thoughts. As you are focusing on your breathing, on a candle, on the tone of a bell, you let those other thoughts that come in, whether they're anxious, whether they're happy, whether they're hunger, you let those come in and go out on their own. So you're not grabbing the leaf, you're not picking it up and playing with it or staring at it. You let those other thoughts go and you use that bell or that candle or the guided meditation to kind of try and bring yourself or your breath to stay focused on something and help your body relax. So depending on which class you are in, I might have you do this for one of your activities, but here in this video, I'm not going to play those, but definitely if that is part of your instructions, do go ahead and watch that and go through those instructions. In addition to mindfulness, there are a lot of other relaxation techniques. This is one that's pretty common. You think of 5 things that you can see around you. Like right now, I'm staring at a camera and a light in my eyes. You acknowledge 4 things you could touch. I guess I could reach up and touch the light or the camera. 3 things that you can hear. I hear that my heater in the background just turned off. Acknowledge 2 things that you can smell and 1 thing you can taste. This might be called a grounding exercise, but it's really a thing to focus and have your brain change the network. Oftentimes our anxieties or the things that we're focused on are in that neural network that we've developed over time. So something stressful, something that we feel is threatening our well-being, and so our brain has a network, since we've been concerned with it for some time, that it's really easy to do that. So this helps our brain to get off that track, focus on something else, and can help lead your brain to more easily jump off the track of those anxieties. Triangle breathing is another example. Feel free to follow these directions and try this triangle breathing exercise. So pause and you can read this. But any kind of breathing exercise is really intended to help regulate stress and calm you down through relaxation. My youngest learned about balloon breathing in class the other day, and they really like it because visually it's something that seems fun for them. They love balloons. So for balloon breathing, they imagine themselves blowing up a balloon. So doing that a couple times until they've got the balloon really big. They have in their mind, they're visualizing the color of the balloon. They tie a string onto it so you can see them like focusing with their hands. And then they imagine themselves like letting the string out as the balloon's floating into the sky and then letting go of the balloon. And then they'll do 2 balloons or 3 balloons depending on how much they need to calm down. So again, any of these types of strategies, you don't have to do these exact ones. There's a wide variety of ways to implement things like mindfulness and breathing techniques. Some of these are really great for kids. So Cosmic Kids Yoga is one that I've watched with my kids. Sometimes we do this at bedtime if we're all too riled up right before bedtime. So it's a really good example of ones that are basically made for children. Another really good way to help regulate and cope is also biofeedback. It kind of combines a couple pieces of this, but it is a way where you essentially hook yourself up to a variety of sensors, and then you can watch on a screen, usually some kind of gamified way of what your heart is doing, what your breathing is doing, and are you able to calm your body down? And so that's the goal, is to calm your body down. And so oftentimes when we're stressed, we might be able to feel our heartbeat going faster, feel that our blood pressure is higher. But if you're living with chronic stress for a long time, you might not realize that. That might be kind of your new normal. So biofeedback can be really helpful to see, oh, this is what my body should be doing. And rather than just feeling it from your body, you're seeing it on these screens from these sensors, giving you more information than your body's giving you on its own. So that's the idea, is you might put an EEG cap, you might put sensors for sweat or muscle tenseness all over your body, and then you practice trying one of these breathing techniques or some of these, you try to relax and then watch usually some kind of gamified thing. We'll watch a little example in a second of this to try and calm down. So here's an example. We'll watch not this whole video. Feel free to watch the whole video. It's pretty short, but I just want to see like what's actually being done.
Well, Dr. Peps, we learned about biofeedback from Dr. Alex, but explain to us what it is.
Biofeedback is an opportunity to see your feedback in real time, how you are breathing, what your heart rate is doing. So this is an example on the screen here. We're looking at respiration and heart rate oscillations. So we're really training the client to create a balanced state in their nervous system. The breath technique that I teach is called resonance frequency breathing, and that is what puts your nervous system into that balanced state.
What's the goal of biofeedback therapy?
The goal is for someone to be able to put themselves into resonance through their breathing independently. So think of riding the bike independently. No more training wheels.
I love it. All right, so you're gonna get me all wired up?
All hooked up.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. This yellow ball is going to move up the scale. You're going to inhale for that length through your nose.
Okay.
And as the yellow ball moves down, you're going to exhale through what we call pursed lips. Imagine you are blowing on a cup of hot tea. Let the belly rise and exhale, gentle, steady pressure through the mouth.
Wow, that was so interesting and cool, Dr. Peps. Now, I could really see how that practice of getting your breath and your heart rate in unison just by seeing it on the dashboard can help you live a healthier life and once you learn it, live healthier for the long run.
Yes. It allows you to recognize when you are not in coherence and to be able to put yourself into resonance, into that balanced, calm state of your nervous system more effectively and efficiently. Able to decrease anxiety on the spot and manage stress better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peps.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So this is a good method for, especially if you are not sure what your body is doing, or for anyone to get a much more clear picture of what your body is doing by having those additional sensors to have that input to help them calm themselves down. So with this is something that I've shown in a couple other parts of the class, definitely in the lifespan development section. These are some of the 6 things that lead us to live a long and happy life. So before we jump into positive psychology in this chapter, I definitely want to focus on some of these. One of the biggest things is your health, fitness, and reducing stress. Like I said, the people who live the longest are the people who have the less stress in their life. So whatever we can do, any of these management techniques. So running through these slides again really quickly, we've got things like problem-focused coping, solving those problems. We've got emotion-focused coping, kind of trying to distract us or have a positive experience even when we have stresses. We've got perceived control, knowing that we can control things helps decrease our stress. Social support can give us support through stress directly and can also give us more positive emotions. We see people with social support have better immune system response. Exercise is a really good way to help your body, one, know how to deal with stress and help it to learn to reset from stress, as well as relaxation directly. Things like mindfulness or breathing exercises or doing something that you find relaxing can be really useful. Another one is also doing this kind of biofeedback training specifically. So with that, decreasing your stress in your life is a fantastic thing to do. Put multiple of these together. If you can problem focus, cope a few of these things, and then also emotion focus cope some of those things that you can't actually control. Really great things to do to help you live a long and healthy life. And with that, we'll move on to positive psychology more specifically. Let's first watch a video about positive psychology. And from there, we'll dive into a little bit of the research, but this will give you a brief overview of everything we're going to be talking about.
Positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. It is a science, and science requires testing theories against evidence. It is not a sequel to The Secret, and should not be confused with untested self-help, fly-by-night motivational speakers, or New Age philosophy. Much of psychology has been concerned with answering the question, what is wrong with you? It has sought to make individuals less miserable, to treat pathology and mental illness. The goal of the positive psychology movement is to make normal life more fulfilling. It asks the question, what is right with you? Instead of trying to help a patient go from -8 back to 0, the goal is to help individuals move up the other side of the scale.
One thing I want to interject really quickly before we continue on with the video is that you'll often see things like self-help books that use a piece of positive psychology or a piece of psychology or a piece of biology, and they have a little bit of the science in there, but then they go, if you read the actual papers about the topic or about the intervention, about the activity, you'll see that this book is going way beyond what the science says can be done. So something like mindfulness, we'll talk about today, and we talked about in the section on stress, is an example of something that's studied in positive psychology. It's not so popular now, but about 5-10 years ago, there was a big movement to put mindfulness in every single school because there were a lot of kind of self-help gurus, coaches, and things that were really advocating for putting in mindfulness everywhere because it's pretty easy to do, and the claims that they were making were really absurd, that it would solve all these sorts of problems. And in many cases, there's a little bit of evidence that there's either a correlation or a causal effect on some of those variables, but it's a good example of one thing where people took a little bit of the data and then went way beyond what the data actually said. So saying that it would affect X, Y, and Z when really it only kind of affects X is what the real science says. So that's one thing to be aware of as we jump into more detail on positive psychology.
The field is intended to complement, not to replace, traditional psychology. It does not seek to deny the importance of studying how things go wrong, but it does assert that strength is as important as weakness, and that it is just as important to build on the best things in life as to repair the worst. Positive psychology is concerned with increasing well-being. Is well-being the same thing as happiness? Not exactly. Martin Seligman, co-founder of the positive psychology movement, describes well-being as being made up of 5 pillars: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Branches of exploration in positive psychology. The term flow was coined by Mike Csikszentmihalyi, co-founder of the positive psychology movement. Flow is a state of absorption in one's work. It is characterized by intense concentration, loss of self-awareness, a feeling of being perfectly challenged, neither bored nor overwhelmed, and a sense that time is flying. Flow is an intrinsically rewarding experience. It can also help one achieve a goal, or improve skills, and is highly related to creative insight. Mindfulness is intentionally focused awareness of one's immediate experience. The experience is one of moment-by-moment attention to thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and surroundings. To practice mindfulness is to become grounded in the present moment. Benefits include reduction of stress, anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. Learned optimism is the idea that a talent for joy can be cultivated. That said, it's important to note the research tells us that the path to fulfillment requires considerable hard work. There are few, if any, shortcuts to sustained happiness and well-being. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. It is contrasted with learned helplessness, which is when one believes that he or she has no control over what occurs, and that external forces, such as genetics or social class, ultimately dictate his or her ability to accomplish a task or succeed. Evidence suggests that well-being is not simply the result of a fortunate spin of the genetic roulette wheel. There are things that people can actively do to lead more fulfilling lives. Professor Howard Gardner is leading a large-scale effort to identify individuals and institutions that exemplify good work.
So that's a good place to stop on this video. This video is a little older than the beginning of that project. That project has gone for a while now. So let's move on to a couple of the specifics that were mentioned in that video. A little bit of the history of psychology is that a lot of positive psychologists really came out of humanistic psychology, but they had some criticisms of humanistic psychology, so you should probably remember things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, seeing people as agentic, these kinds of things. So from that, they decided at the time that humanistic psychologists weren't doing enough statistical tests, some experiments, and the actual scientific testing of theories. So there would be a lot of discussion of theories, but not so much testing of those theories through experiments. So Seligman, Csikszentmihalyi, others like Nakamura all decided that what we should do is make a new field called positive psychology that focuses on a few of these things that are more testable specifically. So there was a little bit of a fight for a while between the two. Now in the field, we're 25 years past the early 2000s, where work was really starting to pick up in positive psychology. So half a century basically from that point. And essentially now you might see a positive psychologist publish in a humanistic psychology journal or a positive psychology journal. So I've published in both. So with that, that's because a lot of the work does overlap. There still is a little bit of the humanistic psychology is a little more focused on theory and discussions and review papers and putting out new ideas that they're not necessarily testing, but there is a lot more scientific testing in humanistic psychology than there was when that split happened. As well as, while there is more of that scientific testing in positive psychology than humanistic psychology, it has done more of that bringing up new theories and ideas and bringing them into it. So they're more balanced, more similar now, but they do have some specific topics that they really like to focus on that are distinct from each other, but there is still a lot of overlap. So as an example, some of my research on heroism, the interventions and things maybe fit a little bit better into positive psychology or even developmental psychology. Some of the research I do on heroes look at trying to describe some more descriptive research. Some of that has fit better in humanistic psychology journals. To give you a sense, there is a lot of overlap, even though they are definitely distinct fields. So Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi were some of the original founders. Another one of my professors, Nakamura, at Claremont Graduate University, were some of the original starters of this research. So the main couple things that I want to get across is positive psychology has these three pillars, and then we'll focus on the PERMA model of well-being. So positive individual experiences, positive traits, and positive institutions. So starting first with positive individual experiences, these are usually the positive emotions, right? So studies of contentment, happiness, hope, joy. Usually these positive individual experiences are short-term and we experience them as pleasant. So there are a couple different types of positive experiences. We can have hedonic experiences, and this kind of research and this description of hedonic pleasure goes all the way back to ancient Greece. So hedonic is like pleasure and happiness. If you go to a concert, it's probably very pleasurable. You have a fun time versus eudaimonic is more realizing your full potential, feeling like you're where you're supposed to be, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So if you are the person doing the concert, right, you're probably experiencing more eudaimonic happiness and eudaimonic pleasure. So that is that you feel you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So if you are, say, an artist, getting your work into a gallery, you probably feel like you're realizing your potential versus visiting a gallery might be something that you enjoy. You're feeling happy as you're doing that. Hopefully those examples make sense. We've got more going ahead. So if not, that's okay. So here are a couple examples of articles around positive emotions specifically. And this one on the left is really a chapter, a recent chapter on positive emotions. Fredrickson is a really good example of someone who talks about broadening and building. One thing we see with these short-term positive emotions is that it can help change your neurology and your brain and its focus. So even when we have a short-term positive emotion, it has a positive effect on us. We literally have a broaden and build impact. So with that positive emotion, we're a little more able to put more things into our working memory. So there's been interesting tests done of being able to have your peripheral vision. So we've seen people's peripheral vision is actually a little broader when experiencing a positive individual experience rather than kind of narrowed in and focused when they're having a negative experience. Also your working memory. So on average, people can hold about 4 things in their working memory. When you're having a positive experience, you can hold a little bit more than that. You might be able to hold 5. If you can hold 3, you might be able to hold 4. And this kind of thing can make it easier for you to accomplish goals that you're trying to do, succeed in something. So it has kind of a broaden and build upward spiral effect that positive emotions can be a piece of the puzzle to make it so we can overcome challenges, get better at things, build our skills, and from that feeling more positive, so a big positive upward spiral. That being said, I do want to emphasize that positive psychology doesn't ignore the negative. So we understand that those kinds of negative things happen, depression, anxiety, it is not ignoring that. Any given positive psychologist might not be focused on that research, but some are. So this is a paper, an example of the role of positive emotion and contributions of positive psychology in depression treatment. And this is a systematic review talking about lots of different ways positive psych works for depression treatment. One of my advisors in graduate school is doing this kind of work. One thing that's really hard for people suffering from depression is that they often lack the motivation and the engagement to be able to reach out to someone for help. But that's one of the biggest predictors of them actually getting help and getting better over time. And because that's such a hard thing, just because of the symptoms. So for all the symptoms combining, make it very unlikely that someone will actually reach out, let someone know that they're in depression and they need some help. But one thing that my advisor found is that when we give them a feeling of elevation, which is a feeling that we get, it kind of like those warm fuzzies, a little bit of happiness when we see someone do good to someone else. So someone do something pro-social. That kind of warm fuzzy feeling makes people just a little bit more likely, gives them kind of that broaden and build experience to make them a little bit more likely to contact someone about needing help. So whether that's a friend, a roommate, a parent, or actually a hotline, they're just a little bit more likely. And so it's a useful intervention. So again, not every given positive psychologist is going to focus on emotions. They're not necessarily all going to focus on specifically treating depression, but a lot of the findings can overlap and be used. One thing that we see is that a lot of positive psychology works very well as, say, you could think of it like preventative medicine as well. And a lot of the interventions also do work to help a lot of those disorders, even though that's generally not the focus of a positive psychologist. So my work doesn't really focus on treating things. I focus my work on building people's purpose in life, building people's pro-social behaviors, and in turn that can help improve other parts of their life. But my focus is those specific things. So you'll find some researchers that are really focused on those kinds of things. All right, so let's move to positive traits. We've talked about traits in the class before in regards to like personality traits. Personality traits, we're trying to find those predictive variables that we could know. Are you extroverted? Are you introverted? Can we predict how you'll behave in every single situation of your life? We found that that's not really the case. Social situations are pretty powerful. But that's why we don't really consider these traits. We call them character strengths and virtues. As well as me as a developmental psychologist, I call these characteristics. So things like love of learning, courage, compassion, resilience, creativity, self-control, wisdom. These are all examples of character strengths that people might have. The idea behind character strengths is that everybody has some of them and you can build them. They can change over time, they might decrease over time, but you can intentionally try to build them and you can use them in positive ways. So I'm going to navigate to this website to the main page of all the character strengths to show an example of all of them. So here are all 24 character strengths. You can see they're kind of clustered into these virtues. So humanity is made of kindness, love, and social intelligence. And you've got a little definition if you hover over each of these. But let's look at all of these strengths. And as I scroll through these in your own notes, put down a few of these strengths that you think you might have. I'll point to a few specifics that you might not understand the definition. So a few that you might not know the definition of, let's look at prudence. So being careful and cautious, planning ahead, and zest is feeling that you have a lot of energy, you're engaged, you're enthusiastic about life or the things you're doing in general. And the main idea of all of these character strengths is that each of them is a strength. You have some of these, other people have others, you might share some, but all of these are positive in and of themselves, and they can be used in positive ways in your life. You can use these different character strengths in your work, in your relationships. You can use these character strengths in trying to overcome challenges or reach goals. And maybe you have a goal that maybe you want to build humor. You can build humor in your life. All of these can be increased and improved over time with effort. And so they do change. We don't expect character strengths to stay the same forever. We also know we can intentionally try to work on them. One last thing before I move away from here, my face might be covering it depending on what Zoom's doing with my screen, but there is a free survey here that you can take to check your character strengths. Essentially what it will give you is a list of them ranked, saying which ones are your top strengths and then which ones are your bottom strengths, and they're just all kind of ranked in order. So if you see something that's in your top strengths that you didn't realize was one of your strengths, that could be useful for you to know. If you see something closer to the bottom that you're like, well, I really thought I had that, or I'd really like to improve that strength, you can intentionally work on that. And that's the idea, is that we can use these strengths to overcome challenges, accomplish goals, be engaged with life, and these kinds of things. Using your strengths is a lot more closely related to eudaimonic well-being. So I did a study of heroes and looked at their character strengths. I expected that I would find everybody kind of fell under one category, that they all kind of shared characteristics. And there were some shared characteristics, which was really interesting. But I also found there were basically two other categories. One was open, loving, and risk-taking heroes. They had those character strengths as really big. And then the other one was spiritual, socially responsible, and prudent heroes. I figured all heroes were very risk-takey, and that's why they were more likely to take risks. But no, half of the heroes in this sample were prudent. They plan ahead. They really think through. And I found that really interesting because we had people in both groups that had like saved people from burning buildings or cars or jumped in rivers, as well as done things that usually you consider taking longer time, like whistleblowing, that you have to plan things out a little more in advance versus a quick action. So yeah, it was a really interesting study using character strengths, and this is probably the closest piece of these three pillars that my research is connected to. If you want to look more into character strengths, this is a good chapter. This might be a article instead of a chapter, but it's a really good review of the VA character strengths, the research, and how they're used in day-to-day work, applied work as well as research. So here's that list of those and the categories for all of the virtues. So I found that in general, bravery, honesty was pretty high for heroes, as an example. Some of the heroes were very high in humanity, versus some of them were higher in this kind of temperance and justice section. All right, so then the next pillar of positive psychology is positive institutions. So in your notes, really quickly, write down what do you think are examples of positive institutions. I might also call them positive contexts. So write down in your notes some things that would be positive contexts or positive institutions. Well, hopefully you have a few things written down. Some of the most common things that we investigate for positive institutions are schools, families, probably families first, and then schools next. And then after that, we go to things like nonprofit organizations, but also look at governments, businesses. So in these kind of cases, we're oftentimes making interventions and trying to make these institutions more positive, work better for people, to help people achieve their goals, to have higher well-being, to use their strengths in positive ways. And so the idea is that positive institutions are for building communities, making organizations and institutions that are good for people. There is some research in business. This has definitely been increasing over the last years. There's not as much research on governments and economic systems, but a lot of these other institutions we've got a lot of research on, which is really fantastic. Here are some examples of studies. So the Girl Scouts do actually publish a lot of research on the evaluations of their programs. This is just one simple example. This is a comparison of Girl Scouts and then basically their peers who weren't Girl Scouts and what their body images were. And the Girl Scouts had better body images. Here's another example of looking at school climate. Positive school climate is really very predictive of positive things in the lives of people. So really good example there. Another interesting positive institution is media. Sesame Street is probably still the most researched TV show ever. So the things that they do, they don't always publish the research they do, but the things that they do evaluate, they do testing to see does it work how we think? Is it either making kids better at math, getting them more engaged with reading, or is it helping them be more pro-social? Or other things that are more positive, right? So Sesame Street has a ton of evaluations. You could do an entire dissertation on Sesame Street research. Honestly, there's so much out there. But here is one example of that. It's a meta-analysis of looking at children's learning across 15 countries. So really interesting thing that we have a lot of research on Sesame Street as a positive institution. So with this, you probably notice, especially if this is towards the later end of all our class weeks, that I've brought up a lot of these points many times in class before. And that's because my degree is in positive developmental psychology. So I'm a positive psychologist, I'm a developmental psychologist, and really these match very well because developmental psychologists really focus on things like strengths and thriving across the lifespan. And that's essentially what positive psychology is. It's looking at helping build people, helping them thrive, positive parenting, social relationships, building emotion regulation, your cognitive development, the interactions between a child and their parent, or the child and their neighborhood, the child and their school, the systems around people. Basically, positive psychology is developmental psychology, or developmental psychology is positive psychology. There's a lot of overlap there. So that was the three pillars. Hopefully you have a much clearer understanding of positive psychology now. Now there's a lot of slides actually in the slides, depending on if I haven't deleted them. There's some hidden slides about different positive psych interventions. So three good things is a really easy one, very common one. And the main idea for positive psychology interventions is that this activity, writing down three good things that happened today, it's not intended to fix every single problem in your life, right? It won't. But if you do three good things and you're doing that consistently a couple times a week, maybe every day, research has shown that this leads to increases in happiness over 6 months. We see that as you train your brain to focus on things like the things that were good or the things that you are grateful for, that you can build new networks in your brain. This is often one thing with, say, anxiety or depression, that you have essentially habitual neural networks to ruminate and think negatively or to think about the things you're anxious for. And that's what our brains do. Our brains are really good at, if the brain knows that we are often doing this thing, right? Whether it's playing an instrument, skateboarding, driving a car, we are always writing, we're always doing math. It gets really good at making strong connections to make it so the brain takes less energy to do those networks. It does that too with things like ruminating thoughts on negative things and depression. So these kind of activities can help start training the brain over time to jump off that track. Jump off the track of those negative emotions. Jump off the track of those ruminations on anxieties. Again, doing this gratitude walk, doing the 3 good things activities, they're not going to fix it entirely, right? They're a piece of the puzzle. They are a help, they're a support, especially since they're so easy to do and so free to do as well. That's a really nice thing about them as well. But those kind of interventions can help and build your brain to be doing things differently. Kind of like we were talking about with the stress section of doing exercise can really help your body, your hormones, and your brain, the neurons in your brain and the neurochemicals to help kind of reset. It's a similar sort of idea. You're helping your brain do things a little bit differently by focusing on things you're grateful for or the things that are good that have happened to you. So let's jump into well-being and the PERMA model specifically. So again, hedonic pleasure, hedonic well-being is that those short-term things like feeling that sense of mindfulness, feeling that sense of joy, versus eudaimonic is more you're doing what you think you should be doing. You're realizing your potential. You feel self-actualized. You have a purpose in life and you're working towards that. So this is well-being. This is the model that is currently used. PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So going to this first one of positive emotions, we've already talked about this a little bit. These are the short-term hedonic emotions. So gratitude, hope, joy, optimism, savoring. Savoring is like when you take something in, you spend more time focusing on it. So you might savor the food that you're eating, something like that. You can savor a moment as well. If it's a really pretty sunrise, just take some time with it. That's pretty enjoyable. But the hedonic treadmill applies to all of these. The hedonic treadmill means essentially when you have these positive experiences, if you're having, let's say you start a new job, it's a great new job, you're really happy going to it every day, your emotions are up, you kind of get used to it over a while. And so that you are now at a new baseline, right? So you get used to that. You're not so happy about going into work to that new job, even though you still enjoy it. The joy, those feelings of positive emotions are not feeling so strong anymore. It's kind of similar to a person who, it's not the same, but it's kind of similar in a way to someone who is using some drug, let's say alcohol, and they build up a tolerance to it, so they drink some more to have the same feeling. It's kind of the same thing, where our positive emotions, we get used to that. We go back to our baseline of feeling, and it might take something more to have that positive emotion. So that is why positive emotions is only one piece of the PERMA model. So positive emotions is a thing that you will often have as you do the other things in the PERMA model, but you will have them, and they are positive. So next is engagement. Engagement is using your skills, using your character strengths, and using them on things that are important to you, something challenging, some of your goals, if you want to create something, just basically anything you want to do. If you're engaged in it and you're trying to do it, something that you want, it's meaningful to you, that will bring you some of those positive emotions and be in and of itself intrinsically rewarding. So engaging in things that are meaningful to you is good for your well-being over time. And one big key piece of this is flow. Flow kind of fits here kind of perfectly. It is an individual experience that's positive, but it is also engagement in something. You don't get into a state of flow unless you're actually engaging in something. So with that, let's watch a little video about flow and then talk about these models and diagrams that are here on the screen.
It was the first game of the 1992 NBA Championship Series. The Portland Trail Blazers were pulling ahead of the Chicago Bulls when Phil Jackson called a timeout. Michael Jordan emerged from this timeout with a sense of intense concentration. And though it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, He would then go on in the next 18 minutes to hit 6 three-pointers. At one point, he looked to the sidelines and shrugged his shoulders, seemingly surprised by his own success. He later described this experience as being in the zone. Now, players in every sport describe this similar experience of being in the zone, where they tune out the crowd and the noise and the distractions and just play at their top performance. But it isn't limited to sports. Artists and authors, musicians, engineers, composers, they all experience this same sense of being in the zone. It's a strange paradox where time seems to stand still, and yet it seems to be over in an instant. It feels effortless even though you're facing an extreme challenge. There's a sense of relaxation, but it's also intense. You seem more present than ever, but you also seem to lose your entire sense of self. You've probably experienced this before, when you were so engaged in a task that you lost track of time and place. There's a term for this. It's called being in a state of flow. And if we want students to be fully empowered to own the creative process, to engage in deep and meaningful work, well, then we need to understand what it means for students to reach this state of flow.
So we'll finish this video in a moment, but one thing I would like you to do is put down in your notes, based on the description of flow that you've already heard, a time that you feel that you've been in a state of flow. And if you can't think of one, think of some things that you might want to do to get into a state of flow, something that might fit it. And then we'll talk about the couple components to get you into a state of flow that will then lead to you having a state of flow. And does this activity that you want to get into a state of flow with, does it meet those requirements, essentially? So take a minute, write down a time that you think you've been in a state of flow, and we'll see if it lines up. Because it is in and of itself a really intrinsically rewarding experience.
Although the idea of flow has existed for thousands of years, flow theory began in the 1970s and 80s when Hungarian psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi became fascinated by artists who were so lost in their creative work that they would lose track of time and even ignore food, water, and sleep. And through his research, he noticed a similar experience with scientists and athletes and authors and all kinds of people who engaged in meaningful work. It was a state of hyper-focus and complete engagement, and he described it as optimal experience. Researchers do not have one single working model for flow theory, but there are a few factors that the theorists have described as being vital for achieving the state of flow. Number one, it needs to be a task that you find intrinsically rewarding. You're not going to hit a state of flow while necessarily, mowing the yard or cleaning toilets, unless that's your jam. Number two, you need clear goals and a sense of progress. It helps if you are actually setting the goals yourself. Number three, the task needs clear and immediate feedback. You need to know what you're doing and where you're going. Number four, the challenge must match the perceived skills. This requires a sense of personal control or agency over the task. In 1987, researchers published the 8-channel model of flow shown here, and notice that if a task is too easy, you might experience apathy or boredom, but if a task seems too hard, you'll be anxious. The goal is to match both the skill level and the task at hand. And number five, it requires intense focus on the present moment. So
that video goes on to focus on how this could apply in school settings. We'll talk more about how it applies to just daily life, hobbies, things that you want to do. It can apply to school as well, though. So here is one of the key pieces of that, the challenge of the activity and the skill level. But the other 5 things are very important. So it has to be something that you want to do, something that is intrinsically rewarding to you. So this could be playing music, doing art. A lot of creative pursuits really fit this, but it could be performing on a sports team. It could be something like pole vault or boxing. It could be video games as well. I'll come back to video games in a minute, actually, for some of these examples. So something that you find intrinsically rewarding, something that you like or want to do. Maybe it's writing, maybe you like doing math, maybe you like coding. Lots of things can get you into a state of flow. So a couple key pieces, the clear goals and sense of progress really goes well with clear and immediate feedback. So if you have goals and a sense of progress, what you're trying to get to, as well as really quick feedback on it, the quicker the feedback is, the better. So let's say you're trying to get into a state of flow as you're working out. Well, having, say, apps that tell you how you're doing, being able to see your form, see the weight increasing or not, or having even a mentor or a trainer there to support you through it to improve and help you set clear goals and give you feedback is really good. It's not going to be, let's say, I've written a paper tonight and then I send it to my mentor tomorrow and then they give me feedback. That's too long. The feedback needs to be a lot clearer, a lot more immediate. That being said, even with something like writing, you can tell if you are writing well, if you're focused, and you have maybe some clear feedback. Maybe if you see a lot of the words going red, you know, maybe you need to focus a little more, or maybe that's just me. Writing is one area where I often get in a flow state. And a big part of this that you can oftentimes set up is matching the challenge to your skill level. So with that challenge level, if you have a high skill, you need to have a high challenge. If you have low skill, well, it just needs to be a little challenge. So you've probably seen this as you've developed some skills. A good example of this is if you've ever learned to drive a car. So it might be 1 year since you learned to drive a car. It might be 10 years or more since you learned to drive a car. I'm trying to do the math in my head right now, but I can't do that math in my head of how many years it's been since I learned to drive a car. But with that being said, it's been a while. But when I first tried to drive a car, my skill level was very low. When I first learned to drive a motorcycle, so I'd been driving cars for years before I ever tried to ride a motorcycle. My skill level, though, was very, very low. I didn't know how to use the shifter, getting used to the brakes and the throttle at the hand controls. So my skill level was very low. I didn't know how to balance the bike well. So I was very anxious and worried as I was riding around a big empty parking lot and trying to build these skills up. Over time, my skill level slowly went up and I got closer to this part where kind of you just feel okay. You don't have a sense of apathy or boredom or flow. But then pretty soon after learning to either drive or ride the motorcycle, I got to a place where just normal city driving, I would get into a state of flow. It was challenging enough for my skill level that I was engaged enough with the hand controls and balancing the bike that I got into a state of flow with that. But that being said, my skill level continued to increase, and after that, just normal daily driving on a road no longer got me into that state of flow. This is one of the reasons you might see some people try to drive faster or take more risks and basically increase their challenge on the road to get into that state of flow, which is not a good idea. A better idea that you could actually do if you're in a car or on a motorcycle is rather than doing that on city streets, because once your skill level gets so up here, you're going to probably be bored. Your skill is high, your challenge is low, just on normal city streets, so you're bored. You might not even be paying attention to your driving. But one way you could increase your challenge is go to a racetrack. So there's a lot of types of racetracks or training courses even that will increase your challenge, whether it's driving or motorcycle riding, and there you can get into a flow state. So you can do this with a lot of things. You could do it with music, you could do it with climbing. They've done a lot of investigations of flow on people playing chess even. So there are a lot of ways you can do that. And a big thing is that intense focus on the present moment. So if you know you can easily be distracted by something or you don't have enough time to focus on it, you don't plan to try and get into a flow state with it. So as an example, if I know it's half an hour before my kids are going to be needing to have their food made, well, they're going to come in and disrupt me if I get into a flow state. It's going to pull me out of it. So I should plan maybe other tasks instead. And then later when I can have intense focus, or maybe I have to turn off my notifications to be able to intensely focus on that present moment. So hopefully you can think of some times that you've been in flow or you would want to be in flow, because it is a intrinsically rewarding, it's a enjoyable experience, and it is matching our challenge and skill. And that's why it is so important in that engagement piece of the PERMA model. All right, the next one is positive relationships. And we'll see just a little bit of Dr. Peterson talking about positive relationships. Again, one of the early researchers in positive psychology.
happiness is a product of our pursuits, not necessarily the pursuit of happiness per se, but the pursuit of other things that make life worth living. So if you take very seriously your work or your family or your community, if you pursue the good in those domains, guess what? You're going to be happy as a result. Sometimes when I give a talk and I tell the audience, if you really don't want to listen to me for the next hour, listen to me for 5 seconds, because I'll tell you what positive psychology is all about. Other people matter, period. I'm done with my talk. Anything that builds relationships between and among people is going to make you happy.
So a really great couple statements that other people matter and that anything that builds relationships in between people is going to make you happy. And that is really the key piece of this positive relationships. Relationships can have us feel feelings of joy just by hanging out with people. They can bring us meaning. They can help us engage with other people. They can give us senses of belonging, accomplishment. When I investigate purpose in life, one of the most common purposes is towards family and having a strong family connections. Strong, healthy, and securely attached relationships, both for friends and family, are a protective factor for a ton of things. You just learned about stress, and that social relationships are one of the biggest protective factors for stress. Same thing. So other people matter, and anything you can do to build relationships in and among people is going to give these other pieces of the PERMA model. It will provide you accomplishment. It will provide you engagement. It will provide you meaning, build these relationships, and bring you positive individual experiences. So it's a really good one to focus on. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to have this many friends, right? You can have 1 or 2 friends that you're really close with, but you're building those relationships. Or it can be bigger than that, right? It depends on what you feel like, how you feel, what you feel you need to feel your best. The next thing is meaning, and we've alluded to this quite a few times, and this is an area of research that's been looked at by philosophers for literally millennia. What is meaning? How do we have a meaningful life? And for positive psychology, there is some of those discussions as well, but we've kind of settled on the idea that meaning is your own personal sense or feeling or connection to something bigger than yourself, so that you feel this thing is meaningful. If you feel this thing is meaningful, it's meaningful. That's about where we're at with that. So with that, you might feel a lot of meaning in nature. You might have a spirituality or a faith. Your goals might be meaningful to you. So institutions can really support meaning in these ways. So your family might support you in the things that you find meaningful. Religion, science, social causes and organizations. All these things can support what you find meaningful. So for maybe these people here walking through the woods, maybe nature is very meaningful to them. And so spending time in nature is a meaningful experience. This is a little different than purpose. Purpose in life takes meaning, but you add on goals and beyond the self-engagement. So essentially, a walk in the woods wouldn't be a purposeful activity. It would be meaningful. Something purposeful towards nature might be you're working with an organization that protects the environment. So you have goals around the thing that you find meaningful, the nature, as well as you are engaging with it beyond yourself. So it's not just you, you're working on the planet, on the world, in this community, whatever it is. So that's a distinction between meaning and purpose in life, but meaning is one of those components of purpose. With that, we've come to the end of accomplishment. Accomplishment is pretty easy to understand. Humans feel good when we achieve our goals, when we feel competent, when we master things, when we see success. So there are a lot of areas you can build accomplishments. We talked about relationships being one already, but sports, hobbies, work, school. You will have well-being if you have accomplishments, if you have meaning, if you have relationships, if you have engagement, if you have positive individual experiences. So we've seen this video before, but I think it really goes well with this chapter and this section on positive psychology, especially for the accomplishment piece. So we've talked about self-efficacy and self-determination before, so hopefully you can see those connections, but I want to pull up this funny little video really quickly.
What, do you got any words of wisdom? What about for all the other kids trying to learn how to ride their bike? Can you say anything to them?
Definitely one of my favorite videos on YouTube. Trying not to use too much of it. Even just this quarter, I had a video copyright struck because it was in there. So we'll see if it stays in there or not. If it's not in there and you're seeing me talk about it not being in there, go and click that link and go and watch the video about the kid learning to ride the bike and being really happy about it. So he had that sense of accomplishment. So you understand well-being now. Your positive emotions, your engagement, your positive relationships, the meaning in your life, and your accomplishments all go together to be what we call well-being. So that sense that you are doing what you feel you should be doing and that you feel good about things in life. So if any of these you don't feel are super strong, if you feel like you have positive emotions but not meaning, work on those things. That's a key thing of this kind of model is you can kind of focus in on one or more at any given time. All right, and last thing in positive psychology I wanted to talk about is positive youth development. So these are the 6 C's of positive youth development. Makes a lot of makes it easy to get them confused with each other, but confidence, this goes back to that self-efficacy we were just talking about, a belief that you can meet challenges. Also competence. So competence, knowing that you have skills, that can be also your character strengths that enable you to do things. Caring with people or compassion, that you are a caring person. Connectedness or having relationships with other people, having safe and secure bonds, and then character. So like those via character strengths and having those characteristics. That is character. If you have all of those C's, you might have this other C, contribution. So we see when young people, a lot of this research has been done in adolescence and late childhood. When we see competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring, oftentimes these young people are also contributing to their environment. So they're engaged with something in their community, with their friends. They're doing more than maybe other kids their age. And so with this kind of model of positive youth development is a really good way to look at young people. So there's a lot of stigma against adolescents that we're worried about their sexual behaviors, we're worried about their risk-taking behaviors. And when we tell a young person that they're doing a good job because they're not doing any of the bad things we don't want them to do, that's not a great way to talk with them. Instead, we can talk about their skills. We can build their skills. We can do school interventions. We can do family interventions, community programs to help young people thrive, to figure out what they want to do, to build their well-being, to build their character, their caring, their commitment to people around them. That is what positive youth development is all about. You can see it's very related to developmental psychology. We basically already talked about it in our chapter on lifespan development. But I wanted to watch 2 little videos here. One is an example of a person talking about their positive youth development program, and the second one is actually some adolescents talking about their experiences going through a different positive youth development program.
My name is Ty Sells. I work for Youth International. I'm the Director of Training for Youth International. And Youth is a youth development program, positive youth development program, started back in 1982. Positive youth development to me means creating a safe environment, a safe place for young people to develop their skills, to develop themselves. So there's an element of self-exploration in it, finding out what they truly value, what they truly care about, what really matters to them, helping them to feel valued and necessary, looking to give them a place where they can explore and figure out what matters to them and then develop the skills to help them in any direction. We've now adopted this concept that the prevention or the development is the prevention, that the more we develop young people in their skills, their social competencies, their decision-making skills, other skills that allow them to be successful in life, it also serves as prevention for alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, but bullying prevention, suicide prevention, and so many other different areas that affect young people today. So to be successful, your attitude of them has to be one of them as a partner, and they're a part of their own success, and you see them as valuable and necessary, and you're going to help them feel that way, and they feel that from you. Then you create an environment where they feel safe, both physically and emotionally. Then we move into the skill development, creating a relationship with them, and then move into that skill development of the things I've talked about before as far as What types of skills do they want to work on? Where do they see themselves going? What do they aspire to be and do? And then how can you as an adult help guide and facilitate them getting there? And by facilitation, I'm saying make the way easier for them. What can we do to make their way easier, to help them be successful? I would say those are some of the key components. We also have to have a positive approach to it, not scare tactics. We want to make sure we're approaching, again, the upside of positive choices as opposed to the downside of negative ones. Then we also want to look at not only as an individual, so we want to do all that stuff for them individually, and then we move into an environmental perspective. So what can they do to give back to their community, to support their community? It works both ways. You want to encourage your community to set up an environment to support their positive decisions, but then by involving them in working in their environment, involving them in having a responsibility to contribute to the environment, you continue their skill development. So the idea of what we just say no, we're more about saying yes. What's the upside to positive choices? Nowadays, what we approach is what's the upside to positive choices as opposed to the downside of making negative choices. What are the consequences of the negative choices? A couple reasons for that is a lot of research has been done on brain development, and we find out the young people's brains are still developing, and although they are capable of understanding the information of why to say no to something or what the harmful effects might be, it's not, or even understanding and being empathetic towards somebody else's life that may have gone through struggles or may have had difficult times, even though they're capable of understanding that, it doesn't equate to behavioral change for them. So what we look at now is let's embrace their strengths, let's embrace the assets that they have, let's embrace their goals, their aspirations. What's the upside of these positive choices as opposed to focusing on consequences of the negative?
Well, that one's a really good example of a positive youth development program, really great explanations of what's involved in them. And hopefully you can see how not only for a parent, but also somebody working with young people. So whether you're a teacher, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a mentor, that if you're working with people, that respecting them in this way, helping them find their skills, that being part of that system that is encouraging them to do good in their life, to build this positive youth development, is going to help them thrive. So hopefully that's something that you can take with you into your future, however you're going to be interacting with young people. This positive youth development approach is a much better approach than trying to stop negative things. When we see that we do these kind of programs, not only are they building skills and enjoying themselves, building their well-being, their engagement, their compassion, but we also see some of those negative things that we used to really focus on stopping. We see those decrease as well. So let's see some words from some young people who went through a positive youth development program as well.
I have a lot of passion. We all have a lot of passion.
The youth have a voice, and the youth go through stuff.
I joined it because I thought it'd be fun, try something new.
Because I love joining different things to meet different people from different places.
We had time to free write, going through my emotions and writing.
My internship, I wanted to do human resourcing, so they connected me to City Hall, and that's how I ended up getting my job there.
The good bond I have with Mr. Harper. This has helped me know that I have goals and I need to complete those goals.
I really liked the camaraderie that you get when you do a show.
Being able to connect with them no matter the age, no matter how short or tall they were, and no matter our backgrounds.
Just because we're young and we are teenagers, it doesn't mean that we don't go through stuff. People should respect that teens also go through things.
I really like the one young person in there who talks about how they realize that they have goals, and so now they need to achieve those goals. They're motivated to achieve those goals is kind of what I hear from what they say. That a lot of young people have kind of rules and standards and expectations of you've got to do this, this. But it's a much different thing when they realize, oh, there are things that I want to do, that I can do, that I have the ability and skill to do, and I want to do these things. And then their own intrinsic motivation for those is really, really useful. So that is what positive youth development is all about. With it, now we've gone a lot over positive individual experiences, positive characteristics, positive institutions. You have a lot better idea of well-being with this PERMA model. And I wanted to share another couple quick findings from positive psychology. One area in happiness that's been researched is, does money buy happiness? And no, as long as you're above the poverty line, it doesn't really matter how much more money you make. It doesn't make you happier. But for that, you do have to be above the poverty line. With that, also completing gratitude activities, doing little interventions can lead to greater physical health, optimism, pro-social behavior. So again, this is little things over a long period of time. Any one gratitude activity isn't going to solve everything in your life, but they are pieces of that puzzle for healthy development. So healthy human development can also take place even in conditions of great adversity due to resilience. So even obviously we don't want people to be in a state where they've had giant natural disasters, war, things like this. But even in those situations, we see people can be resilient and still develop positively. We also see minding, and minding, especially if you're interested in like relationships and attachment theory, minding itself is a really good thing to look into because it's doing the kind of intimacy. So self-disclosing, sharing things about yourself, your goals, and also caring about what the other person in this relationship, what do they care about? So paying attention, paying mind to them, minding that relationship. So we also have a lot of research on policy. So how do we make institutions better? One thing that we see with policymakers is they're not really convinced by data. So as much data as we've collected as scientists to say X, Y, and Z are really good, you should do it. It doesn't convince them. The thing that can convince them a lot better is actually anecdotes, stories, really clear, concrete examples. So let's say you had someone do a school program for a positive school climate. Bring a couple of the kids who went through the program to the office of that policymaker that you're trying to get more funding for that program. Have them tell their stories and say, this is the situation I was in. This is how this program helped me. This is where I am now. Like a good story for a couple people to actually connect with. That ends up changing policymakers' minds a lot better. In the slides, I have additional resources. A lot of these are specifically tailored to positive aging. So a lot of us here in this class are adults, maybe even further on into adulthood. So it can be something that you might consider and think about. We did get a few of these in our lifespan development chapter. But yeah, a good thing to think about. And it also is related to some of the things we've talked about in living a long and healthy and happy life. That these main 6 things of health and fitness, reducing your stress, preserving your mind, continuing your vocation or hobbies, keeping up your relationships, staying involved with the community, and engagement beyond yourself are really some of the main things to help you live a happy and healthy life with a lot of well-being and live longer. So I've also linked in, depending on your class, you've probably done a few of the fostering purpose activities. If you want to go through them in more detail, this is a link to them. They're free for you to access. They're really great positive psych intervention. They were designed basically from for young people in between about the ages of 14 and 30. So in some of the examples, it says, think about your life at 40. Rather than thinking about your life at 40, especially if you're past 40, think about your life 20 years from now. So that is one adjustment to make there. And that is it for the chapter on positive psychology as well as stress. So pay attention to your syllabus, check what the next chapter you're supposed to be reading is so you stay on top of things.